I was still standing in the doorway when my mother said I had abandoned my dying father. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. 12 people were already seated, watching me like I had been called in to answer for something I didn't understand yet. My brother held papers in his hand. My sister wouldn't look at me. No one asked me to sit. No one told her to stop. The room stayed quiet while she spoke about sacrifice and family. I felt every word land. And I said nothing. I stood listening and let them finish everything. My mother asked me to sit after that, like nothing unusual had happened. The chair they left for me was lower than the others, slightly uneven, placed in the center of the room. I noticed it right away, but didn't say anything. I walked over and sat down carefully, adjusting my weight so it wouldn't wobble too much. No one offered me water. No one asked how I had been. It felt less like a visit and more like something arranged. My brother cleared his throat and looked down at the pages in his hands. He said, he had written things down so there would be no confusion. That word stayed with me. No confusion, as if the problem had already been agreed on before I arrived. As if I was the only one who needed clarity. He started listing dates, missed calls, times. I hadn't been present moments, he said mattered. He spoke slowly. Like he wanted each detail to land properly. I recognized every situation he mentioned, but not the way he described them. He said I didn't answer when my mother called 3 times in one day. What he didn't say was that I had been at the hospital, helping my father through a difficult night where he didn't recognize anyone and kept trying to leave. My sister spoke next. Her voice was softer, but the words were heavier. She said my father had asked for me near the end, and I wasn't there. She didn't mention that I had been there the day before, and the day before that, and almost every week for years. She didn't mention that I had already used all my time off from work just to sit beside him while he slept, or stared at the wall. I listened to them talk about me like I wasn't in the room. Then my mother stood up. That was the moment everything shifted. She didn't stay in her chair like the others. She stepped forward, just enough to make sure I had to look up at her. She said she didn't understand how I had become someone who could turn away from family. She said they had raised me better than that. It wasn't what she said. It was how certain she sounded. There was no hesitation in her voice. No pause. Just a steady belief that what she was saying was true. I looked at her hands while she spoke. They were steady. No shaking, no sign of doubt. She had already decided who I was before I walked in. Someone behind. Me shifted in their seat. But no one interrupted. No one questioned anything being said. It felt like everyone had agreed to stay quiet long before I arrived. My brother added something about money. He said they had struggled while I had chosen not to help. That part almost made me laugh. But I kept my face still. I thought about the invoices I had paid without telling anyone, the receipts I had kept in a folder no one had ever asked to see. My mother sat back down and folded her hands in her lap again, calm, composed, like she had just finished explaining something simple. Then she looked at me and asked if I had anything to say. I didn't answer, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was starting to understand that nothing I said would change what they had already decided. It didn't start in that room sitting there. Listening to them speak, I realized how familiar the feeling was. The quiet agreement. The way decisions were made without me, then explained to me later like they had always been obvious. When my father was first diagnosed, we all sat at the same kitchen table we grew up around. The doctor had explained everything slowly, carefully, early stage, but progressive. We would need a plan. Care, finances, time. I remember looking at my brother and sister, waiting for someone to take the lead. My brother said his business was struggling. My sister said her kids needed her. My mother cried and said she didn't know what to do. They all looked at me next. I said I would handle it at the time, It didn't feel like a decision. It felt like the natural next step. I had always been the one who stayed calm, who organized things, who followed through. So I started small weekly visits, checking medications, scheduling appointments, making sure my father had what he needed. No one stopped me. No one said we should divide the work more evenly. No one suggested we write anything down or make a formal plan. It was just understood that I would take care of things, and they would help when they could. At least you're good at this, my sister told me once, like it was a compliment. My brother would call occasionally and ask for updates. He spoke in short sentences, always in a hurry. He would say he wished he could do more, then hang up before I could answer. My mother thanked me in the beginning. She would say she didn't know what she would do without me. But even then, her questions were always about them. Have you heard from your brother? Is your sister coming this weekend? It was never. How are you managing? As time passed, the visits became longer. The responsibilities grew heavier. My father started forgetting small things first, then larger ones. He would repeat the same question within minutes. He would forget where he was. Sometimes he didn't recognize me at all. I learned to adjust without reacting. I would answer again. I would remind him gently. I would sit beside him until he calmed down. I kept track of everything. Medication changes, appointment notes, bills. I made lists because I couldn't afford to forget anything, and still, the pattern stayed the same. My brother came on holidays. My sister came when it fit her schedule. They stayed for short visits, brought small gifts, and left with the comfort of knowing they had shown up after they left. I stayed behind. I cleaned. I checked the next appointment. I made sure nothing had been missed. No one ever said I had to do more, but no one ever stepped in to do it either. Even when the bills started coming in, it followed the same pattern. We agreed briefly to share the cost. It was said once at the table, like everything else. No details. No follow-up. The first time I paid the full amount, I assumed it was temporary. The second time, I told myself they would send their share soon. By the 6th month, I stopped asking, not because I didn't need the help, but because I already knew what the answer would be. And sitting there now, in that room, listening to them describe me as someone who had walked away, I realized something quietly. They hadn't forgotten what I did. They had just chosen a version of the story where it didn't matter. The moment everything changed didn't feel dramatic. It didn't happen in that room. Or even the day my father died. It happened months later, in a quiet afternoon, when I finally stopped trying to make sense of things that were never meant to include me. After the funeral, I waited for someone to reach out about the practical details. There were still bills coming in, the last months of care, medical costs, paperwork that needed to be handled properly. I sent a few messages in the family group chat, asking when we could sit down and go through everything together. They were all read. No one replied at first. I told myself they needed time. Grief looks different for everyone. I didn't want to push too hard, but weeks passed. Then months, and the silence stayed the same. When I reached out individually, the responses were short and careful. Mom's handling it. Talk to your brother. I think everything's already sorted. No one gave me a direct answer. Then one evening, I saw a photo online. My mother was sitting at a restaurant, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. There was a man beside her, his arm resting comfortably behind her chair. The caption mentioned new beginnings. My brother and sister had both commented underneath. As if this had been happening for a while, I kept scrolling. There were more photos, holidays, small gatherings, moments I hadn't been part of, dates that overlapped with the last year of my father's life. Times when I had been driving back and forth, managing appointments, paying bills, sitting in quiet rooms while he forgot who I was. I didn't feel anger right away. It was something slower. Something settling into place. Few weeks later, I received a document in the mail. It was related to my father's estate. Basic information, nothing detailed, but enough to show that decisions had already been made. The house was gone. Accounts had been closed. There was no mention of the expenses I had covered. No one had told me. I read through it twice, then set it down on the table. The room was quiet. I could hear clock ticking in the background for a long time. I just sat there, looking at nothing. That was the moment I stopped waiting, not for answers, not for acknowledgement, not for things to be made fair. Went back through my records that night. Every payment, every invoice, every note I had kept. It was all there. Organized the way I always kept things. I wasn't looking for proof for them. I wasn't planning to send it or argue about it. I just needed to see it clearly for myself. The pattern wasn't complicated. It never had been. I had carried everything. They had stepped around it, and somewhere along the way, they had decided that was enough. The next time my mother called, I let it ring. When my brother sent a message asking how I was doing, I didn't answer. It wasn't a decision made out of anger. It was quiet, final, in a way I hadn't felt before. Didn't need to explain anything to them. I didn't need them to understand. By the time Easter came around and they invited me over for that important discussion, I already knew what I would hear when I walked in. I also knew something they didn't, and for the first time, I wasn't going there to be heard. I was going there to listen after that day.